Welcome to this narrated PowerPoint on vocabulary instruction and methods. I'm Jay Rasmussen, a professor of education and coordinator of faculty development at Bethel University. This PowerPoint will be used to present some basic content information that will be developed more fully during our face-to-face session. Throughout the presentation, I'll make reference to some documents that were provided earlier. You'll want to keep these handy. I also suggest that you take notes during the presentation and then come prepared to engage with the material on a deeper level when we're together. If you find yourself on cognitive overload during the presentation, you may want to view the material in 2 sittings. Before we begin, I'd like to present a simple overview of this narrated PowerPoint. First, we'll look at the relationship of vocabulary to comprehension and fluency. Next, we'll examine the size of student vocabulary, and then we'll look at what we call word learning tasks and tiers of intervention. Then we'll look at the process of vocabulary acquisition, followed by considering the report of the National Reading Panel, and then we'll finish by examining methods of teaching vocabulary. We actually know a great deal about vocabulary development, and research has been conducted in vocabulary since 1891, when the first estimate of vocabulary size was published. From 1890 to 1920, just a little bit of work was done in the field. It was in 1921 that vocabulary research once again hit prominence with the publishing of the Teacher's Word Book. This was a book that each teacher was expected to keep on their desk, and in the book was a list of words that teachers at every grade level were expected to teach. From 1920 to 1950, vocabulary research was flourishing, but little research was conducted from 1950 to 1970, and since 1970, there's been extensive work done in vocabulary research. Before we look at some of the most valuable research, I thought you might be interested in a little bit of vocabulary trivia. John McCloy, a lesser-known vocabulary researcher, found that people with well-developed vocabularies are likely to be perceived as the following: smarter, taller, wealthier, and morally superior. Let's start by considering the relationship of vocabulary to comprehension and fluency. A 1944 study by Davis revealed that vocabulary knowledge is the second most important factor affecting comprehension. This begs the question, what is the most important factor if vocabulary knowledge is number 2? I'm going to give you 10 seconds to make a prediction about this. If you said decoding, which is a logical response, you're actually not correct. It turns out that background knowledge is the number 1 factor affecting reading comprehension. This point was made crystal clear to me one time when I was asked to read a passage about radionuclear chemistry. I could decode every word in the text and read it fluently, but I had no comprehension at all of what I was reading simply because I didn't have the necessary background knowledge to connect with the text. Through the years, we've learned that students must have a fairly thorough understanding of a word for that knowledge to aid comprehension. Teaching vocabulary in a proper way can improve reading comprehension. But vocabulary instruction alone may not be enough to improve comprehension for some students. Comprehension training techniques are also needed. Not only is vocabulary knowledge important in the comprehension process, it's critical to reading fluency. The number 1 factor, you might ask? This time you're correct if you said decoding. Believe it or not, vocabulary knowledge is the single best predictor of school success. Why do you think this is the case? Be ready to share your thoughts when we meet face-to-face. Catherine Snow of Harvard found that we can predict with 78% accuracy how a child entering kindergarten will perform on language skills when in 6th grade. On an even more somber note, we found a direct correlation between how students do on the reading portions of the MCAs and graduation rates. I'll let you look at the slide. Let's take a look at the second item on our agenda, size of student vocabulary. Please advance to the next slide. Before we move further into this slide, I should say that there's some diversity of thought about the size of students' vocabulary. But a widely accepted rate, however, is a reading vocabulary of 4,000 words for first graders at the conclusion of the year, about 25,000 to 50,000 for junior high students, and 40,000 to 80,000 for senior high students. This means that the average rate of vocabulary growth is 3,000 to 4,000 words per year. But there can be a significant difference in the number of words read and understood by middle-class students and economically disadvantaged students. That gap is typically about 50%. Not only is SES important, as mentioned earlier, the education level of the parent, especially the mother, is absolutely critical. Just to give you an example, we found if a mother is only high school educated, her kindergarten child will enter school knowing about 5,000 words. If the mother is college educated, her child will enter school knowing about 15,000 words. We ask students to learn two types of words, content and structure or function words. Content words are nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. The structure words are the little words that come before the content words. Examples would be words like is, of, are, and, for. Real meaning often comes from an understanding of structure words. These are glue words. They hold the language together. It's not as much fun to teach these words, however. For example, puppy is much easier and more fun word to teach than structure words. It's interesting to note that the 100 most frequently used words in the English language, the Dolch list, account for 50% of the words in text. Almost every single one of these words is a structure word. The 1,000 most frequently used words account for 90% of the words that are used when reading the English language, and a high percentage of these words are structure words as well. We have two types of vocabulary, receptive, what we can understand in text or in listening, and productive, words we actually use in daily life. As you might expect, we have a significantly higher receptive vocabulary than productive vocabulary. The next slide, however, will show you a surprise. A Time magazine study showed that the average 18-year-old had 25,000 words in their productive vocabulary in 1959. By 1999, that number had dropped to about 10,000. Please take a little time to think about why this number has dropped so significantly. I'd like you to share your ideas when we meet face to face. Let's take a look at the third item on our agenda, word learning tasks and peers. Please advance to the next slide. Michael Graves documented the different word learning tasks on this slide and the next one that you and I and our students engage in when we learn new vocabulary. Please stop this presentation now and take a few minutes to read your document called Word Learning Tasks. You'll see the additional word learning tasks on this slide. When we meet face to face, I'd like to hear which tasks you feel your students are engaged in during your instruction. The English language now operates with about 5 million words. K-12 students, however, can only expect to see about 55,000 words in their reading. These words fall into one of four tiers, and I'd like you to advance slowly through the next 4 slides. For each slide, you'll notice a few comments related to the definition of each tier and how the words are best taught and assessed. I'll not make verbal comments as you advance through the slides. At this point, I'd like you to consider all the ways in which your students acquire their 3,000 to 4,000 new words per year. You may want to list these on a piece of scratch paper, or it's fine to just consider the ways in your head. But please think about vocabulary acquisition in and out of school as you build your list. Advance to the next slide after you've given this thought. Researchers have investigated the very question that I just posed for you. Their findings are found on this slide. When we meet face-to-face, I'm going to ask you to create a pie chart that represents what you feel is the ideal percentage of time to spend on each of the 5 ways of acquiring vocabulary. Before doing this task, which will be designated just for your students, I'd like to share some helpful information about each of the 5 ways that vocabulary is acquired. Nagy and Anderson have found that those who do a great deal of free reading, the 3rd grader mentioned in the slide for example, are more likely to have automatic word access. Many believe that beginning in the 3rd grade, the major determinant of vocabulary growth is the amount of free reading that a child does. Voracious readers are able to pay more attention to comprehension versus simple decoding as that automaticity develops. It turns out that a substantial portion of vocabulary learning occurs through context. It also appears that complete learning of a word's meaning is a gradual process, probably extending over years of time in which the word is repeatedly encountered. As children get older, they improve considerably in learning word meaning from context. The biggest improvement occurs during the 5th grade and early 6th grade years. A 6th grade student is better at understanding word meaning from context than a 3rd grader. An 8th grader is even better at the task than a 6th grade student. Helping kids understand context clues isn't the total answer, however, because those clues are only supplied about 1/3 of the time in the English language. It turns out that there's a simple 4-part strategy that you can teach to children to help them better define words from context. Take a look at your documents in the next 2 slides for the strategy called Teaching Students to Use Context Clues. Please note that this strategy must be modeled before students do it. Here's an example of the 4-part process with a portion of text. Here's how the student responded to the task. Let's look now at direct instruction as a means of acquiring new vocabulary. There is, however, a time and place for direct vocabulary instruction, and the 3 important factors in effective instruction are listed on this slide. Consider amount of practice given each word. Words must be accessed or recognized quickly, or the reading process is interfered with. Providing students with the opportunity to use words in several different contexts is better than just one flashcard drill with limited use of context. Consider breadth of training in the use of words. If a word is well integrated with other knowledge, accessing that word is likely to result in accessing other related ideas. The whole schema of information is likely to aid comprehension. With each experience a child has with the word, a richness of knowledge about the word increases. A valuable experience for a child is to compare and contrast words with one another. For example, words like hurl, thrust, and nudge. This type of study brings a more precise understanding than if words share no common basis. Consider degree to which active processing is encouraged. Active participation develops not only knowledge of word meaning, but how to use the knowledge effectively. Methods should involve practicing the abilities that one needs for reading a story. Active attempts to use new words and make decisions about them may be much more important than just hearing words defined a number of times. On this slide, you'll see some helpful reminders about first introducing new words. I'll give you time to read through this slide. For a large number of teachers, direct vocabulary instruction means simply having children or youth look up definitions in the dictionary. It turns out that this is not very helpful for them at all. Students have difficulty processing information from definitions because of what is called fragment selection errors. That's when only a portion of the definition is remembered. You see an example of this in the slide. The direct instruction methods with the highest effect are those that include both definitional and contextual information. Students are often asked to use new words in sentences. This is a difficult, complex task. It takes time to get to know a word well enough in order to use it in a sentence. Instead of having students write sentences using new words, Beck, McCowan, and Kukan suggest having them complete sentence stems, which prompt them to use the word appropriately and in a sentence which shows that they know the meaning of the word. For example, the widow is grieving because. In order to complete the sentence, students will have to consider why a widow might grieve. Here are a few other thoughts related to direct instruction. I'll give you time to read through the slide. Even the most systematic direct vocabulary instruction program in existence accounts for a small proportion of the new words that children learn. Most programs typically teach 10 to 12 words per week, or about 400 per year, of which about 75% are really learned, or about 300 words per year. Recall now that students are learning about 3,000 to 4,000 new words per year. The value of teaching individual words is not so much the number of words that can be taught, but rather the focusing of students' attention on words and letting them know that we value word knowledge. Direct instruction takes on even more importance with an ELL population. In this slide, you can see the results possible with direct vocabulary instruction on a regular basis. Most ELLs are able to handle a smaller number of unknown words before the comprehension process breaks down. Students first learning English need to be taught only a few number of words at a time, 3 to 7. As they get more language proficient, they can handle more words at a time. Studies on minority and low SES students have shown that these students encounter fewer words of Greco-Latin origin. As mentioned before, the education level of the parent, especially the mother, is the number one factor in a child's vocabulary development. Catherine Snow says that a key measure isn't just how much talk, quantity, that happens in the home, but rather the use of rare and richer words, quality words, and extended discourse. It's good to have cognitively challenging vocabulary. Classroom curriculum is especially important. The second biggest predictor of vocabulary development is the vocabulary that's used by you as the teacher. There needs to be a language-enriched environment, cognitively engaged talk, where teacher and student dialogue happens. In order for this to occur, it's essential to study interesting topics and themes. Sadly, most kids from language-impoverished homes go to preschools that are also language-impoverished. Doing school right can help to compensate for this. Let's finish off with morphological analysis. As you can see in this slide, a huge percentage of words are affixed in the English language. Teaching certain affixes will cover about 75% of the prefixed words and about 85% of the suffixed words for grades 3 through 9. In your documents, you'll find an article entitled Teaching Elementary Students to Use Word Part Clues. In the article, you'll find a chart like the one on the screen. There are about 120 prefixes in the English language. Take a look at how frequently they occur. This slide, based on the article, suggests teaching the top 9 prefixes. In terms of suffixes, there are about 180 of them that occur in the English language. I'd recommend teaching the top 11. An outstanding method for teaching both prefixes and suffixes is found in the article. So, in summary, there are 5 ways that your students acquire vocabulary: free reading, context, direct instruction, oral language, and morphological analysis. As I mentioned before, when we meet face-to-face, we'll complete an activity they call a pie chart activity. This will require you to use some of the knowledge that you gained about vocabulary acquisition through this narrated PowerPoint. Let's finish off by looking at 2 additional items. First, I'd like you to look in your documents for the NICHD 2000 document. Please read through this piece in advance of our face-to-face meeting. Now, let's look at the important issue of teaching vocabulary. It's interesting to note that if there's some regular vocabulary instruction, students will experience 12% gain in vocabulary knowledge. Even better yet, if the direct instruction is for words in the passage that students will be reading, they'll on average experience a 33% gain in vocabulary knowledge. The single best way I found of determining which words to focus on for vocabulary instruction is listed on this slide. First, identify important vocabulary that must, should, could be taught. Give primary focus to a limited number of must words. Second, determine which word learning tasks are required for the must words. And third, select an appropriate strategy for the word learning tasks that your students will be engaged in. When we meet face-to-face, we'll practice using this process on an organizer in your documents called Choosing the Words. Once the organizer is completed when we meet face-to-face, you'll be asked to select some vocabulary strategies from the document called Suggested Vocabulary Strategies.